Imagine if your brain had its own secret trick to remembering everything around us, and you've been ignoring this gift all along. This is the fascinating world of the memory palace, the secret beats of memory and learning that are built within our brains. It's a secret we've been ignoring for far too long, and it's a technique that I want to show you in this video today. So let's dive in. Centuries ago, the ancient Greeks and Romans, they never had any phones or to-do list apps or any sort of reminders that constantly told them about all the things that they needed to remember. And yet, they had so many things that they also needed to remember in their lives. So how did they do it? Well, that's what gave birth to the method of loci, or as it is known today, the memory palace. The science behind the memory palace has to do with the fact that our brains contain two structures called the hippocampi, two structures that are deeply involved in memory and learning. But what these structures are extremely good at is spatial environmental encoding, which basically means they are always creating maps of the environment around us. Everywhere we go, in everything we do, our brains are always recording information about the spaces that we are interacting with. And the spaces that we interact with often again and again and again are more deeply encoded into the very fabric of our brains. And this is where the memory palace comes in. You see, the memory palace technique takes things that we are completely familiar with and marries that with things that we are unfamiliar with, which, if you think about it, is the essence of learning. Essentially, what you do is that you picture an environment that you are extremely familiar with. Take, for instance, your childhood home or the apartment that you currently live in. And it populates that environment that you are very familiar with objects that you need to remember. But the key trick is that as you picture yourself walking through this environment and coming across the objects that you want to remember, how you'll ensure that you'll make sure to remember these objects is by imagining these objects in the most imaginative, vivid, and bizarre way you could possibly imagine. The more bizarre, the more memorable. And couple that with it being in an environment that you're already familiar with makes the entire thing much easier for your brain to remember. But enough explaining, how about I show you an example and we go through it together to demonstrate just how simple yet incredibly effective this technique can be. Let's say that you have to remember 3 countries, China, Italy, and India. So now the first thing you want to do is picture your childhood home, or picture any space that you're extremely familiar with. Maybe it can be your current home or your office space, whatever it is that you're instinctively familiar with. Ready? Let's go. Let's say you took your childhood home. Imagine you walking through the front door, and the first thing you are greeted by is a pair of chopsticks that are waving at you from the front door. That's a bizarre image, but immediately it makes you think of, okay, well, chopsticks, then Chinese food, China. All right. Then as you are greeted by these chopsticks, you walk into the living room and you find a giant pizza that is laying over the couch or slouching over the couch. And this giant pizza is changing the channel to channels where people are singing opera. And it lands on a channel of Pavarotti singing opera in his amazing way. Here's a pizza, immediately makes me think of Italian food, Italy, and well, Pavarotti, Italian singer, everything about Italy. But let's carry on with the example. Let's say that the chopsticks that it greeted you at the door take you away from the giant pizza man slouching on the couch and take you towards the kitchen. And here you're greeted by the sight of a giant pot of curry that is stirring itself. And next to the pot are a couple of spoons that are dancing and singing. Obviously, the first thing you think of with curry is probably India. And so here are 3 countries represented by things that maybe might be a bit stereotypical, yes, but are very easy for you to remember. You know, a pair of chopsticks, China, a pizza, Italy, and a giant pot of curry, singing and dancing, India. And what's the beauty of this technique is that you can remember the order of these countries in reverse order as well. It's up to you. But you can see how you can start building on and populating your entire familiar home environment with things that you are not familiar with, but in wildly bizarre and imaginative ways. And it's all interspersed in an environment that you're already familiar with, your childhood home. But remember, it can be any sort of place that you are familiar with. But then how about we take that even one step further and make it even more simple? What if you don't want to, always just picture the same environment? Because think about it, if you always thought about your childhood home, you might end up running into trouble, because now the next time you want to learn a new list of things, are you going to still use your same childhood home? Won't you get confused? And sometimes yes, but there's actually a very simple trick to prevent this. And it actually just means that you can take everyday objects that you know you will use often and use those objects as placeholders for things that you need to remember. So let's say, for example, I want to remember China, and then I pick up this pen. So I look at the pen and I immediately can instead imagine a pair of chopsticks, and I imagine myself using the chopsticks to write a few sentences down. It is a bizarre image, but immediately then the next time I look at my pen, I can think about the chopsticks and immediately remember China. And then I can do the same with my phone and say, as soon as I pick up my phone, the phone starts singing loudly in opera music, loudly in the voice of Pavarotti once again. Again, Pavarotti, opera singing, I think of Italy. And then lastly, let's say I pick up this cup, and instead of this being a central pour cup, I instead picture a steel glass or a steel cup that is famous in India, and it is filled with curry, and the cup starts dancing as well. Whatever it is that your imagination brings to mind that makes you think of India. But again, you can use 3 seemingly, meaningless objects and immediately tie them up with vivid images that are linked to the things that you want to remember. So you see how even using everyday objects that you are extremely familiar with and then tying it up with vivid images in bizarre and fascinating ways can make the whole process of memorization and remembering things so much more fun, so much more engaging, and so much more memorable. And this is a skill, and as with every skill, it becomes easier with practice, until eventually everyday objects all around you can be used as placeholders for things that you always want to remember. Let me know if you've used this technique before. This video idea was actually on request from one of our channel's subscribers right here. And if you want to also be featured in a new video, why not comment down and let me know about any sort of topic that you are deeply interested in the field of neuroscience and health in general. Because this video turned out to be a bonus video in a greater series on the neuroscience of memory and learning. And if you're interested in more, well, click right here to dive right in. I'll see you there.